Without a doubt, I grew up among the self-esteem generation. I don't think my parents even knew what self-esteem was. I don't think my wife's parents knew what self-esteem was, but we sure did. When I started parenting, I had a deep commitment to make sure my kids had good self-esteem. I'd have some relatives who would grab hold of the kids and spank them and yell at them, and I'd get angry, and I'd worry that that was just going to ruin their self-esteem. Now, truthfully, I don't know who had better results, my parents or me. I mean, the jury's out yet on that one. But I can say for sure, good self-esteem has always been what I wanted for my kids and what I have wanted for everybody I have ministered with. Well, it seems, at least from my observation, that in today's reading from Isaiah, God has no self-esteem problem. Did you hear his words, or did you hear Isaiah's words today? I am the first and the last. Besides me, there is no God. Who is like me? Let them proclaim it. Is there any God besides me? There is no other rock. I know not one. Wow! No self-esteem problems here. No lack of confidence on God's part. He's the main event, and you just better get used to it and deal with it. I suppose when you are God, you can say this kind of thing. It may sound cocky or needy if you or I said it. I guess God has every right to such high self-esteem. But honestly, I think there's more going on here than this. Isaiah has a reason for highlighting the godness of God, God's self-esteem, and he's not doing it just to stroke God's ego. Isaiah is addressing a group of exiles who had been through great trauma. Their land and their temple had been destroyed. Some of their brightest and best were sent off into exile by the evil Babylonians. And this trauma put their God on trial. Marduk, the god of the Babylonians, must have won the battle, you see. They were living, therefore, in light of the shame of a loser. And they were searching, they were desperate for a reason to go on. And Isaiah is a cheerleader here. He wants them to go on. And he does so with a message about the godness of God, about the one who is above all the fray, above what might be said to be the data on the ground. Isaiah addresses the exiles not with information about what the trauma has done to them or who they appear to be as a consequence of what happened to them, but with a word about who God is. The message is meant to elevate them above all the trauma, while not pretending that it doesn't exist, by the way. Traumatized Israel, remember God. Remember the God who redeemed you in the past. Remember how you made it through before. You can make it through again. I'm very intrigued these days by the folks who are working on what's called trauma theory. These folks describe how trauma works and what is needed for those who have been through trauma. And one of the things they suggest is that trauma work is primarily identity work. For you see, trauma threatens identity. It threatens who you are beneath it all. It challenges the center of you. In order to deal with trauma, you have to discover the you deep down inside of you, because the trauma has torn that you apart. If you've been raped, if you've been beaten, if you've been sexually or emotionally abused, if you've been a victim of a natural disaster, if your nation or your people have been enslaved, you got a lot of identity work to do in order to discover health. For you see, trauma takes its victims, It eats away at who you are individually and who you are corporately. Therefore, you must rediscover you, because sometimes trauma wants to become you. And sometimes you let it become you. So, the trauma experts tell us, people who have been through trauma, if they want to go forth in a healthy way, must figure out how the trauma fits into who they are, but does not become who they are. To put it in a fancy way, and this is probably the way the psychologist would put it, they must integrate their trauma into their identity. I am widowed, but widow is not the only thing I am. I was abused, but abused is not who I am at my core. These realities are a definite part of my story, but they don't define me. This, I think, is what Isaiah is telling the exiles. There is something bigger than what they've been through. And for Isaiah, that something bigger is God. God is God, and you are not. Yes, exile is horrible. Yes, your land was destroyed. Yes, your very precious temple was destroyed. Yes, those Babylonians have wanted to take the life out of you, but you are a creation of God. You have been redeemed by God. Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel, Israel's Redeemer, the one who took you out of the horrible hands of the Egyptians. I am the first, and I am the last. I speak the first word, and I get the last word. It's not time to throw in the towel. It's time to get back up, and it's time to get to work. It's time to move forward. And your memory of my past involvement in your life will help you. My promise for your future will guide you. Do not fear or be afraid. You know, sometimes in life, we need to know that there's more than just us, more than just our abilities, more than what has happened to us. Sometimes we need to know we are not God. Sometimes we need to know that we are not in charge, not simply because we need to be knocked off our thrones or thrown off our high horses, although that probably is worthwhile once in a while for some of us. No, we sometimes need to grasp our inability to control life so that we can let go of the burden of having to figure it all out and figure out what life throws at us. A lot of people spend a lot of time trying to figure out the confusing mix that life is. And I got to tell you, that is a very tough job. I've shared with some of you my observation that almost every family I deal with during times of trauma, great sickness or death, has a person from the family who tries to manage it all by attempting to control it. I'm sure you've never seen this happen in your family, but I've seen this happen in a lot of families. Life gets out of control. I've seen this in hospital rooms, and I've seen it in nursing homes, and I've seen it in funeral homes. Life gets out of control, and then this one person steps in to tell everybody what they need to do right now, where they need to go. Instead of accepting the situation as horrible and uncontrollable, they suggest all kinds of things you need to do, some of them absurd, silly, or simply feeble attempts to manage the unmanageable. I remember this popped into my head as I was preaching this. One of my best friends from seminary told me about his pastor who was his supervisor. Thankfully, Gary, you didn't do this. But this pastor, on Easter Day, they lost a little child in an accident. So the pastor, not knowing what to do, is going around telling people, now what you need to do is go home and take a cold shower. We have all kinds of attempts to manage the unmanageable. What a burden it is to need such control, and what a pain it is to those who are being controlled. So Isaiah steps in to remind us, God is God, and you are not. Jesus' parable from Matthew today, I think, says the same thing, really. The message of the parable is really quite simple. Don't pull the weeds. Now, for those of you who find it necessary to remove every dandelion in your yard, I know this may sound like heretical advice. But here's what the master in the parable says when the slaves ask him if they should pull out all the weeds that some enemy has planted in their field. No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest, and then I will tell the reapers what to do with the weeds. In other words, let it up to God. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes between the weeds and the wheat, the weeds and the flowers. Pulling the weeds ain't your job. Judgment isn't in your job description. Now, I got to be honest with you, I struggle with this a lot. Sometimes I think we need to pull the weeds. Sometimes what some people do in a community needs to be weeded out. Some things need to go. But can you imagine the relief that you could experience if you realized that it isn't your job to protect the field from all the weeds? That you don't have to be the judge and the jury? That no one died and left you in charge? Oh, yes, somebody did die. But his name is Jesus, didn't die to put you and me in charge. He didn't die to reinforce human control needs. Quite the contrary. He died because of the tragic human need to control. He died because some grumpy people didn't know how to live apart from the need to control. He was a threat to their control needs, so they did away with him. Violence is what control often leads to. And when we want to get rid of all the weeds, we will utilize all kinds of poison. Crucifixion is often what happens when God is not the main event, when God is not allowed to be God, when we are the judge and the jury for the sake of our small agendas. Strikes me that crucifixion is trauma written large. People in power, like the religious and political authorities of Jesus' day, too often impose trauma. The Babylonians did so to the Jews. What we learn from history and from the trauma theorists is that traumatized people often traumatize. Abused people often abuse. Oppressed people go on oppressing other people. We see it happening in Israel right now. The amazing thing about Jesus is that he stopped the process. Without a doubt, he was a victim, but he didn't victimize. He took the pain onto himself. The church says he bore the sin of the world, but he didn't pass the sin on. He received it and didn't discover someone else to be the scapegoat for it. René Girard says that scapegoating is the primary story of human history. Somebody has to pay the price for the trauma and the sin that we have experienced. By the way, it's a primary reason why we can be pains to other people. Someone has to pay the price, but not in the case of Jesus. Jesus knew something bigger than the trauma, bigger than what the world dished out to him. Jesus lived not by control, but by faith. Trust in the one who is the main event. Trust in the one who isn't primarily power, but primarily love. Jesus knew who he was. But more than that, he knew who God is. A God who can transform pain by the power of love. And you know what? You know that God too. You know something bigger than your trauma, bigger than your sin, bigger than what has been done to you. You know something that enables you to live not by control but by faith. You know something that frees you from having to be judge and jury. You know something that welcomes the weeds around you and even within you. You know love, the kind of love discovered at the cross. So, therefore, do not fear or be afraid. And for heaven's sake, stop passing on the pain and the trauma that has been done to you. Love is the main event. Love that can transform pain has got a hold on you. So, allow love to reign. Amen.